Howdy.
So we are going to dive right into the strength thinking worksheet. So last time we had covered, some ideas around how to fill it out. Did everybody have a chance to work on that at least a little bit? And do you have it with you?
No. Yeah.
So all heck kind of broke loose.
Do we need to be caught up to date on anything?
No, I mean, we're still alive and employed, but Patricia, did you do it?
I think I did, but I'm kind of, I don't know where we are in
Oh, goodness.
So is this where we go through the coin model and we isolate the activity and then we?
It's the 3 stages of intervention.
Okay.
So, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if it's the three stage. Can you say that again? 3 stages of intervention. I want to make sure we're on the same page.
Thinking process.
Yes.
Okay, so last time we had 2 different things. One was the strength thinking worksheet, which is standalone, but you can use it in an intervention. And then the 3 stages of intervention for one-on-ones, which is a process you can use to take a person, a single employee or individual or anybody really, through the coin model. And then you could also add strength thinking as a second piece of that. So those 2 things, the worksheet was something to delve into for your own application. We'll talk through it a little bit. We'll get in there. And then I want you to just know that those 3 stages of an intervention is something you can pull out and use as a blueprint. And then my next question is going to be, did you have a chance to watch the video about the employee sequencing, employee progression?
Yes. Yes. I did do that.
Okay. All right. So are we all pretty clear? Like, does that help clarify it a little bit? Because I know we had a break and there was just a lot. It sounds like a lot going on your end too.
Unfortunately, been a lot happening here, which is really good that we didn't have a meeting last week, which I was like, great, because it's all gone crazy.
Right, we'll have time to, yeah.
And then it didn't happen that way. It just got worse. But anyway, I think we see a horizon. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah.
Okay. Karen, welcome back.
Hello.
Karen was on a cruise.
Oh, welcome back, Karen.
Thank you.
Nice.
In Vegas.
You came back just in time.
I don't know.
People often come back from their cruises just so they can attend this. They cut their cruises short early, so.
Yeah. She had them last port so she could fly back to make this meeting. So.
Special chartered plane.
We are all ears.
All right. So since things have gone a little awry, then I'll give you a bit of a choice. We can continue on with new content, basically discussing what you watched and covering the strength thinking worksheet, though it sounds like we might need to maybe make that a little bit more of a discussion, or maybe we just need to shelve that and move forward into the progression, which I do think is important. But I don't want to rush over the one-on-one intervention. It's going to come up, actually, it's the same process for teams. We are going to cover that again next week. So if you're comfortable sort of putting that to the side and getting to that again next week when we get to the teams, we can do that and stay on track with the employee progression. But I also want to speak to your needs and what you're kind of expecting to cover today.
We really like the idea of moving on, and then we can come back and talk about this assignment that apparently everyone completely fell off the bus on. So yes, please, Belinda. Thank you.
Well, I would like to say a few things about that before we do move away from it. This strength thinking process, it is the real payoff for everything we've been doing. Because really, when you think about what performance is all about, it's how well we perform activities on a consistent basis at a high quality level. So this relates to you. You know, think of Houston Physicians this way. Each of you has a role to perform. It's not even individual. It's not about you as a person. It's about the role you occupy. Imagine that there's another hospital. It's an identical hospital in every way, except, and let's think of them as your competition. A way to think about it is, who is your competition in that case? It would be the person at that other hospital that performs the role you perform. And if you can kind of think about it that way and go, all right, how does that CEO operate, and how am I performing, and how can my performance be even stronger? How does the chief nursing officer or the chief financial officer, and how can my performance compare? So then now multiply it times your physicians, your nurses, your support staff. What we're really talking about for overall excellence, patient outcomes, and so forth is performance. And strength thinking is about that. It is a doorway into performance in a way that, to me, is superior than the other ways I've seen. It says, let's look at what talents you're bringing to those activities and how you can absolutely bring the most of that talent to it, and how to keep those talents from undermining that activity. That's one. Two is, what knowledge do I need to perform that activity? Where is my current knowledge at, and what knowledge do I need that, if I understood it, would make my performance even better? And then third is, what are the activities, or what are the steps of the activities that I need to perform? And am I doing all the steps, and am I performing them well, or could I improve my performance in some of those steps? So this is true for you. It's true for your employees. It's true in outside relationships, whether it's volunteering that you do, or in support relationships, that roles that you play in relationships. So it really is at the crux of everything. Yes, StrengthsFinder is cool. Learning your themes is cool. It's amazingly valuable. There's so many benefits: self-knowledge, better knowledge of other people, and all those kinds of things. But alone, it's not enough. There's more that could be had to increase performance, and that is what this document is all about. So I wanted to say that. I wanted to emphasize that, because this isn't just, one thing that we'll either get to or not. It really is, like, to me, what would separate just learning about StrengthsFinder to actually applying it in a culture. That was my soliloquy for the day.
Very good.
Well, I will ask, just to follow up on Adam's comments. So this worksheet is designed to kind of take you through one idea and really flesh it out. But you've done a lot of this content already. You've worked together as a group with this content. You just had an experience, it sounds like, to really see if that learning is showing up in reality. And I just would like to put that question to you. Did you find you were, one, using any of these concepts in the way that you handled this most recent adventure, let's call it, or as an individual? And then did you as a group coalesce? Or did you find it helped you communicate? Or was there any kind of outcome that you can sort of point to? Because I'd say that is maybe the first big one since we've done the bulk of this material.
Well, I think, I'm not, there were several things going on last week, but for a couple of them, I did think about, how we could use this process. I started it with just, something that, I wanted to learn more about, and how would I approach that. And what this does is it kind of defines those steps that maybe I've taken them in the past, but I didn't have them well defined. But for some of the personnel issues that we're dealing with, I do think it would be helpful for us as a group to use this method and say, when there's a problem with an employee, how can we use this model or this framework to address that? I had a conversation with one of the managers today. She's struggling with a difficult employee, not knowing how to handle that. But, I think if we sat down and we use this, it might help, because when I put down my talents for the activity that I selected, I can see where maybe I might need to call on something that I'm not particularly comfortable with, but that I could use that in that activity. Or maybe intentionally put that as part of the process to make me more comfortable with that talent.
That's great. That's a great idea too. I think one of the things when you have two tools that you could maybe use as an intervention piece. The one that we just covered, which is kind of a general intervention. It's not meant to be ruts or enablers. It's sort of like developmental for the employee. But it sounds like when there is a real rut one, a few sessions back, and the very last session, we're going to be pulling it all together, and we're going to sort of outline the tools that you have. So it might be like, okay, I could go to this for this. There's that ruts intervention, which it sounds like it might be a good process to apply when these issues do come up. So it could be worth thinking on that to see if that's a good fit for what you're looking for there. Does that make sense, the slight distinction? Because that is kind of an important piece, is that we have the three stages of an intervention, which can be applied sort of in good times and bad, you know? And then we have the one that's specifically for handling the conflict in the ruts. And that was a while back, so we'll bring it back in, but that might be more specifically geared toward an issue. That's been a while ago. But I do, yeah, so thank you for sharing that, because I think that that's exactly what I'm kind of after here. Did anybody else experience any kind of like, oh, I'm using this, or I can plug this in?
No, I wish I had thought to do that. I don't know if the outcome would have been different, but.
We're trying to think back too. I think probably, I wish I would have thought to do that as well, but I think what we did was, I think we used each other's talents at the to work through the personnel issues that we were having as a group, whether it would be Heather talking or then Lisa chiming in or something. You could tell that there was we were collaborating together and using our talents to have some difficult conversations with some employees. Probably would have been a really good idea to revert back to this. That probably could have helped us have a little more structure, I think, to the conversation, which I believe we were in a little bit of a rut at the beginning because it didn't seem as structured until probably about 2 or 3 conversations in. And then I think we pulled it back in and became more structured. So that would have really been a great idea to use that. Yeah.
And Patricia, is that kind of what you were saying? Like, we could use this as a structure?
Yes, I think so. You know, for me, it would be better to do it as a group activity first so I can learn from it. But then once I got comfortable with it, then I could use it, you know, myself. But it'd be nice to take even an example and work through it, or we could use a real life situation and see like how could we have done this better from the beginning.
I think that's great. And yeah, let's see if we want to do that today a little later. If you might want to do that privately as a group, like it might be a sensitive area, so you know, I want to be sensitive to that. So we'll kind of circle back to that. And then also I'll say next week we are going to talk about groups and teams. And it's in the context of you as managers, but you'll actually, all this content applies to you in this room as a group. And so I think you'll probably enjoy it from that perspective as well. I know Adam and I are looking forward to kind of getting that on video and to you. So, all right, well, let's move on to the employee progression. I think we will try to come back to the strength thinking worksheet just to maybe talk over an example if we feel comfortable and have time. You watch the video, and so what I'd like is general feedback, and then we're going to go through the steps and just kind of maybe have a little discussion on where you feel like you are, and see where that takes us. I have some ideas.
I'll just put up on the screen some of the slides from the video just as like a little refresher.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so general feedback first. Just comments, questions. Did it feel relevant?
I think it was exactly what we were looking for
Yeah.
as far as the new organization
And what we were asking for too, in
Yeah.
terms of like recruiting and
Yeah.
like the right people and stuff like that.
That's great.
hands-on three.
Yeah.
If we-
I enjoyed the 5 gorilla story. That was very interesting because, I mean, we do that. So that was nice.
Yeah, I really like that story too. It stayed with me for a long time. After I first heard it, I was like, that perfectly describes how we just learn to do what we do when we join an organization or something like that. We watch what other people do. And we behave how we would normally behave first. That's first. And then we start to see how other people, what we get rewarded for and what we get punished for. And then we adopt that. And it's pretty cool.
And so, what I will say again, we've said it in the beginning, we've said it a couple times, accept, reject, adapt. So this is just, gives you a scaffolding, a sort of infrastructure. And now is the time in the discussion where we'll start shaping it a little bit more to your culture and what actually might be useful. And my guess is, we may identify that there's one area you'd like to really shore up and take a more kind of deliberate approach, and it may be all of them. So we'll just see what you think as we go. Any other questions or general impressions? All right, we're going to jump in then. So we're going to go first. We've covered fans on 3. I think everyone's pretty comfortable with that.
Let's just make sure they are. Are you guys comfortable with the fans on 3 concept? Do you understand it? Does it make sense? Is it useful?
Yes. We love that.
I love
It's been
Phantom
used
3.
multiple times.
Yeah, we use it like all the time.
Oh, great. Okay.
We look around the room and label our fans.
You're like, who's on a fan of?
Stole my fan. They just took it.
They just took it away. So would you say, you said that I had given you some questions, and Adam, can you pull up its slide?
213?
Yes, thank you. I'd love you to talk through a few of those questions. If you haven't already done that alone in a group, and it sounds like you might not have had time, let's talk through a few of those. Is there a person in your group who's exceptional at hiring fans on 3, or is there a group with a larger number of fans on 3 that you've really noticed would have to stand out?
I am doubting myself. I'm doubting everything about what I do.
Right. Now, this week is where the rubber meeting the road, isn't it?
I will say this. We had a conversation of the 27 things that's happened in the last 2 weeks. We had 2 interviews. In the first interview, we did what we always do, which is make them fall in love with us. And they did. Everybody falls in love with us. And we, we're amazing and we're this and we're that. And what do you think of all that? And then they're like, oh my God, it's perfect. It's exactly what I wanted. And let me tell you why I fit everything you just said. And we're like crying and they're crying.
Wow.
And then the second candidate came in and I think it was Womack that was like, hey, maybe we should stop doing what we Sherry.
Yeah.
We should stop doing that. And so we actually didn't do that on the second one, which I don't know that, I think the lady was crazy to start with, but it certainly gave her plenty of opportunity to demonstrate her level of like medication need or whatever that came across in that interview, to the point that we thought she was going to cry a few times, like really, not tears of joy. So I guess to that point.
Yeah, and because that's something that we had noticed before, that even because I had just done an interview before that with somebody for one of our departments, and I found myself like doing all of the talking. And then I'm like, okay, well, yes, if I just told you what my ideal candidate is and like how amazing it is to work here, you know, and then you're like, do you think that's you? Oh yeah, of course that's me. You know, so I think we were falsely falling in love with people by telling them what we would fall in love with, and then they were just like regurgitating it back to us. And so I had like really kind of learned I'm like, why have I been talking so much in all of these interviews? I should be listening more. And then we did it again in here, and I think we all started talking about it when you went to walk around, when you went to take her on a tour. And we all kind of came to the same, we're like, each one of us had a little input. So when you came back, we said, okay, how about let's try this? And it was better because we got to see the crazy. And not that we wouldn't have anyways, you know, they were two totally different people. But we may not have gotten to see it had we not forced her to talk as much, you know,
Right,
we
didn't talk as much,
She
yeah.
didn't. I mean, I don't even think she wanted us to ask her a question anyways, because she was going to talk the whole time.
But it might be helpful for us on those panel interviews for the first candidate is to coach them beforehand and say, you need to get her talking and picking up on some cues, because I think your schedule, we'll probably all have a prep meeting prior to that so that we can maybe use some of this and just see if there's a difference.
So we're just interrupting our themes, guys, and trying to find a better way to find people on three that really are on
That
three.
really are.
Right. I mean, it's just like we can woo.
We can communicate, woo, and
You know, but it's not about like what we can do. It's about what they can do. And the more we force them to talk to us,
They're either
the
going to
more
move
we
us or
can
not.
see,
Yeah.
into
I did with my one interview yesterday. Because I have a habit of making you fall in love with our organization. That's what I breathe. That's what comes out of my mouth. So I, on purpose, did that at the end. Like I let her have the whole interview, and I turned around and did it at the end. And I actually fell in love with her because she was saying things that when I rounded it up at the end, it was probably going to be a perfect fit.
and that's what we kind of determined is like, we still want to do that, but we need to let them tell us who they are first. And then
It was very successful. To me, it felt like a better interview because I didn't go in like I always do going, let me tell you about us.
yeah.
You know, so
So what you're saying is, make them say, I love you first.
yes.
Yes.
Exactly, Pam.
Yep. It is about finding that balance because it is, you know, your organizational culture is a strength. And you know that. And so you want other people to experience that, but that kind of goes back to that hypothetical versus let them tell you what they really do. And that's exactly right. If they're telling you and giving the chance to give that to you first, and then it matches, great. Then you can come in with, you know, your pitch, you know, you've turned the volume down to hear what they say so that you can properly assess them, and then you can turn it up when it's time. And that's a great example of dialing in the volume that we had talked about, of like the level, you know, of your talents. And I think, you know, what you're developing here is applying the talents to the hard, you know, the skills. It's like a skill to interview and to sort of know, and it's like, okay, well, now we know we need a little bit more either knowledge or skill development in this area to get the outcomes that we want. It sounds like there's some progress.
I wanted to just bring something up real quick too, and that is that whether you're a great interviewer or a bad interviewer or in between somewhere, what it really comes down to is what's being said. That's what you're making your hiring decision on largely. I mean, there's other things like how they comport themselves and so forth, but largely it comes down to what's being said. And if they said the right things, then they win the magic ticket, or they get the job. And how much of you is what you say, there's a study out recently, and it talks about why adults find it more difficult to make friends than when you're younger. And it's because they say it takes 50 hours to develop a friendship. If you think about it, that kind of makes sense. When you think about the people you become friends with, you spend a lot of time with them. And as adults, we just don't have that kind of time to spend with people. So it's hard to make friends. But when you're in school with somebody every day and they live down the street and you play together, it's easier to really rack up those 50 hours. And what happens during those 50 hours that make you say you want to be friends with somebody? And so then how does that compare? Of course, we're not talking about making friends, but it is a serious relationship. You're saying, come on into my workforce, be part of this team, and bring whatever you have that I didn't know about you, bring that along too. And then it's like, oh no, I didn't want all that extra stuff. Does that make sense? So I think there's got to be more dimensions to making that decision than just the interview. And that's difficult. I'm not even going to say it's easy. I know it's difficult. That's why most people don't do it. But if you really want to make that right cultural fit, it has to be based on more than what somebody said. Just a thought. That's all.
Well, I do think that we need some work in this area because we've kind of mapped out our onboarding process and our 30, 60, 90-day plan. But as far as, this could be applied to that. So using it to do the best that we can to select the right candidate. And then once they get here, acclimating them to our culture, using some sort of framework, and then doing the follow-up with them using the same framework. So it begins to feel natural and comfortable to everybody. I think what we're struggling with now is that not only I think we're a little gun shy on hiring the correct person, but also in the far extreme of those employees that we're having difficulties with. What do we do now? And then how do we deal with those little problems that are cropping up so that we don't get to that extreme point? So it's really the whole spectrum.
Yep. Nice.
Absolutely. And I agree that, and we talk about the stages, but that last stage, developing and retention is really its own stage, but developing, it's ongoing. And so that's where the intervention comes in. That's where the strength thinking comes in. And that is absolutely, it's just, humans, it's ongoing. But I do want to talk to 2 points, one earlier and then one about the onboarding comment. So when you bring somebody in, you've hired this person. I'm pretty sure you only hire people you think are fans on 3. I'm pretty sure you're like, oh, fine, come on in. We already know you're a dud. I have a feeling you just don't do that. So you think you've hired a fan on 3. They show up as a fan on 1 or 2. Do they stay a fan on 1 or 2? Do they progress in toward a 3 once they're comfortable with the culture? That space, that onboarding space is so critical. And so I'm just curious, do you notice a pattern there that it's like once a fan on 1, always a fan on 1? Or is there some progression in the early months that you see like, okay, they're getting acclimated, it's not great yet, but they're getting there. And then later, maybe a year or 2, if they can stick it out and you can work out what does come up, they turn into a fan on 3. So I'm just curious how that shows up for you guys.
I mean, I'll speak for me personally. You know, I can think of one manager who we thought she was a fan on 3. She got here, she was a fan on 1 or 2, and she stayed a fan 1 or 2. And I don't know, like, what
We spent a lot of time trying to figure out why they were there, and
Yeah.
maybe that was the problem.
Yeah,
It's easy to
so-
look back on that, isn't it?
Right, yeah. in
Oh, well, I
hindsight.
shouldn't have done that. Well, we kind of thought it would get better.
Well, and then I wonder, did we really sell ourselves? And she's nodded yes. So, you know, we got married, you know.
Yeah. We actually talked to her about at the LDI because of her themes. I talked to her a little bit about it, and she did say to me that sometimes she misses the chaos. You know, because we talked about, because she's command, and what's her number one? She's
I think she's,
No, she's aviation. I don't remember.
but it's something where she like really enjoys the crisis management mode, and here we don't have a crisis for her to manage, and I think that so she kind of, for the first time I had ever heard her admit that that's truly kind of what she loved about her old job, was the chaos. And I said, well, I can like come down there and like start a fire in the trash can or fall in the hallway. And she's like, no, we don't need any involved.
create chaos.
We'll create some chaos for you. I've been meaning to tell you that I've heard that.
No, that's good feedback. I mean, it really actually helps. But
We
then
suspect.
we have managers that we thought they were maybe a fan on 2, could become a fan on 3, and then they shorted out. Yeah.
Or they're actually a pencil.
Yeah, there's that too.
That's a really good analogy.
That is why our core concept of everything is individual environment fit. So she can be a great person and a great, you know, but in this role, it's just not the environment where she thrives. Flynn and I have this very dear friend who's like all-star nurse, and she had interviewed for a job that was like very prestigious, and like they really invested a lot in her. And then once she started getting into the culture, it just was not a good fit for her, and she was suffering because she's the kind of person who keeps her commitments, but it just wasn't for her, the culture. So I'm like, you know, you're really depriving them of finding somebody who really does want to be there. I mean, yes, they invested in you, and yes, you know, you were sincere, they were sincere, but it just wasn't a good fit. So do you want to stay there and be miserable? And then the longer you're there, the less they have the opportunity to be developing someone else into that role. And so it is that kind of thing of individual environment fit is what really should guide the hiring process and all of the stages of that employee progression.
I'd like to ask this question too. So this one, I don't want to assume the answer. So it's question number 3, how do you define a fan on 3? So is it job performance? Is it job performance and interpersonal skills? Do they need to be the whole package to sort of fit into the culture? Or, I mean, this is a bit of a tricky question because I'm leading you a little bit, and I'm not doing it blindly. But I want you to be really clear and aligned on what a fan on 3 looks like in your culture. Because a fan on 3, I want you to know if you agree or not. You know, do you all kind of across the board recognize, oh, that person is a fan on 3 and we all are clear that's true? Or maybe somebody thinks that person's a fan on 3 and the other's like, in my experience, they're a fan on 1. So just let's talk about that for a minute. Do you feel like you have alignment as a group around who the fans on 3 are?
1, 2 plus something that's not even like the it, like
Yeah.
the culture, like the.
We're very relational. Is that a fair statement? And we're small. And so, you know, I'll use the term like ridiculously polite. And if anything's ever rude, it's just from like unintended like teasing. I mean, you know, generally. And people that don't have the high interpersonal tend to just
immediately butt heads because we're all ridiculously polite. So we see a high performer and they seem cool or likable, and that's kind of, I think, where we get sucked in. Like they're going to fit in with us, and we're just not good at that.
I think you could look at like Patricia used this expression earlier about an employee who creates who's creating problems. And I would say if you took all the problems that, just your collective experience can look at, this person was a problem and here's why, this person was a problem and here's why. And then you listed those out, you could just flip those to what it would look like if they weren't a problem and were actually an asset. And that could be your description for Fans on 3. I have one here, I'll just share with you real quick, that we did. This is for my youth program, so I know it's not the same as a hospital, but we said, what does a Fan on 3 look like in regards to attendance, responsiveness, engagement, and initiative? And then what does a Fan on 2 look like in those areas? And then what does a Fan on 1 look like? Attendance is poor. They miss meetings frequently. They rarely give adequate notice when they miss meetings. Sometimes they're just a total no-show. They're not responsive. They have to be we have to track them down. We have to be like, hey, did you get this email that you didn't respond to? Engagement. They don't bring much to the meetings. They're not accountable for assigned tasks. So that's just an example of what it could look like. And I think it'd be interesting for you all, for each of you to kind of create, a Fans on 3, a description of all 3 for your workspace, your work area. Just an idea.
I do think it's very important to be aligned on a little bit more consistency between you all around what that Fan on 3, what qualities those truly look like. Especially as you're going to shore up the skills and knowledge around the interviewing process, the selecting. It will give you a bit of a measure, and a reference point that you can come to in conversation with each other. Well, I see they did really great on this. They gave me 4 concrete examples, but I didn't hear anything about this. Maybe we should speak to this a little more in the second interview, something like that. So I second Adam's idea of creating what a Fan on 3 looks like. Would it be useful for you to have the document that Adam just showed you?
I actually started writing down notes from it.
I thought about
Okay, we'll get you the document. Let me make a note so I follow through. Send.
I'll just forward it to Heather.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Adam's going to help me out there.
I'm going to activate.
Yes. And I'm going to strength draft.
Nice.
So let's actually move into, and let's actually apply the strength thinking worksheet a little bit to the different areas. So we're going to move first into recruiting. I want you to just give me a sense of where you think you rank out of like 1 to 5, 5 being super strong, 1 being not great, in this area, recruiting.
Individuals or as a group?
I think you can do it as a group, because I think right now, I would like you to think of it for the individual level. But I do think as a group right now, you're really wrestling with this kind of across the board, it sounds like a little bit. So.
Right in the middle.
Say basic.
Yeah, like in the middle of 3.
I mean, if you look at
Or whatever, I forget what the range was.
basics.
Yeah, it's a 3.
So you feel like you're at the basic level, I heard somebody say.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah? Does
I don't
everyone
think we need any extra to make our recruiting like amazing.
Do you feel like you've put, so basic, I think, what I'm hearing in the room is you want this to become a strength. You want this to climb the performance ladder to become a strength of the organization. So recruiting looks like an area to either develop some knowledge, cultivate some skill, or apply some talents more deliberately. Because remember, Fans on 3 are not an accident. So recruiting, and Adam and I were talking about this. If you can do this well, it makes the other steps a lot easier. That's obvious, but it's not. It's sometimes just like, oh, we've got to recruit a group of people so that we can get to the hiring, so we can get to getting that role filled. But actually here, we'll just pave the way for, everything will be easier. So if you're feeling that you're at the basic level and you'd like to advance this, let's take a closer look here. Would you say under this list, it's, yes, oh, Adam's got it up. Would you say, is there an area you already have thought about? Do you need to kind of go in and talk over these bullet points?
We already do the bonus program.
Okay.
I think our attractiveness is up there. We sometimes have to recruit under fire, I think.
That's
kind of
that's very real, especially in your field. Sometimes that you gotta have some hands on deck.
Qualities you need most. I don't know that we necessarily.
We've missed out on that in the past. I mean, I was just thinking like.
It's the
It's the fourth from the bottom.
bottom.
Under in the middle.
Oh, yes.
Qualities you need most from potential employees before you search. I don't necessarily think we've actually listed, like, we need you to be able to do this, 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 and this.
Right. Well, would you like to do this?
Yeah.
Can you do this?
Oh, sure. Of course, I don't have a job right now. I'll do anything.
Well, that was one of the things that when the recruiters came in, specifically they asked us, what are you looking for? What would you like to see? Nobody's really asked us that before we before you interview. So
Yeah, I mean, it's other than like our core values, I mean, but other than that, like, what do you need in each position?
How do your core values apply to the role that you're?
I may know what I want in my head, but do you know? You know
Right.
that.
Right.
That's
Right.
And specific, like performance and skills.
And I think too, what they did too is they talked to multiple people, because obviously what you see and then what you see could be on aligned, but then there's a couple of different areas too that.
The more we talk about this, the more I would like you to try to come up with a document that does define your qualities of Fans on 3, because I do think as you come together after an interview, especially if you're hiring under fire, you need something that's a little bit more objective. And if you have that area to discuss the subjective areas of people's personality, it might help just sequence a little easier that part of the process. I do want to. Oh, go ahead.
I was just adding, this is a great exercise because it's really forcing us to kind of get to the root of defining what it is that we want, because we're like, we all kind of know, but we don't really know. And then we're actually going to spend time. You can actually create questions by going down this road based on those specific behaviors, instead of just taking like some sample generic list of like, these are some best practice interview questions. Like, we're actually able to make that ours.
And everybody's kind of on the same path, what they're looking for with that person when we're doing panel interviews.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if you have an employee who's being a problem and you say to that person, hey, look, you're creating some problems for me, or you're creating some problems in this department, and here's why, and you have something to go back to, that Fans on 3 document, which clearly articulated what you were looking for. And you can say, here, this is what's happening, and this is why it's creating a problem. And so we need to have a problem-solving conversation. That's how I treat it too. I don't treat it like, I know there's all those books like Crucial Conversations and all of those, which are great. But I really think of it as a problem-solving conversation more than anything else. We got a problem. This can't persist. Let's solve it. And it depersonalizes it, and it helps people, it helps frame the conversation, not as, oh, you're picking on me or whatever. It's just, no, it's a problem. If you can't see why it's a problem, that's also a problem. Do you want to solve this problem? No, I don't. okay, you've made it very easy for me. Because my job as a manager is to solve problems.
And I think that does make it easier for everybody because nobody likes conflict or confrontation because it's very personal. But if you take the emotions out of it and you just deal with, okay, here's what we're talking about, this thing right here,
Right.
then it would make it easier.
Right. Like, here's what we need. Here's the issue.
Right.
And
So
let's
how
solve
are we
it.
gonna, how are we going to solve it? Yeah.
Right, and that will give them a chance to participate and hopefully trigger some discretionary effort. Remember, autonomy, and, the whole sense of choice and collaboration around the solution, so they're invested in it. It might not be perfect the first time around, and you might really see, well, okay, now we've done this intervention, and now it's pretty clear what we need to do next, or it improves. I do want to ask, how well is the bonus program working? So you have
I
one.
think it works very well.
You bring in fans on 3 through the bonus program pretty regularly?
Yeah, there's, if it's an employee that is a fan on 3,
Right.
yes, they bring in fans on 3. But if it's, and those are usually the ones that try to.
Right. Like, we don't typically,
Yeah.
like, if it's a fan on 1,
Yeah.
we're usually just putting that in the trash. No.
Right. Well, you should be a little suspicious.
Yep.
But Karen, in your experience, have you had like the high performers, the ones they brought in?
Yeah, they were good.
Yeah, so
Because those are the people, they're not going to jeopardize they
That's
love
right.
it here. They're not going to jeopardize their own reputation, but they're also not going to put somebody into this environment that's not going to work alongside them just as hard as them and be a positive. That's what my experience with it. I mean, the people that get referred by other people, if it is a truly fan on 3, like when you see that person's name, you're like, ooh, I'm calling this person. That's why I told you I stalked Ashley, because one of our best fans on 3 in the business office, Daniela, recommended her, and I'm like, I will follow this lady to her house because if she's anything like Daniela, like, she has to come here. So I mean, I think that in our experience, if it's truly a fan on 3 that refers them, they're pretty good.
I love that you're like, I'll follow her to her house, because that's how valuable a fan on 3 is. Like, right? It makes all the difference. And so basically, I would say the organizations that have the highest fans on 3 ratio to highest fans on 3 to fan on 2 or 1 ratio, they're the best places to work. That in itself is a reward. I think, I would, if I had any life experience at all and someone were to pay me more to work at a fan on 1 environment, I'd say, no way, I'm staying here. Fan on 3 environment is a form of benefit and compensation.
Absolutely. So I was asking that question to say, if it's working, is there a way to either supercharge it or direct it a little more specifically? That's something that, I just want you to think about, because that is probably the easiest. And if it sounds like it's working and working well when it works. And I think how to weed out what isn't a fan on 3 a little easier, because you have some parameters and that person has experience outside of the workplace with the potential candidate. So that goes beyond the interview, like Adam was talking about. So just something to think about. Can that be expanded or further developed or even encouraged among your fans on 3 in some way? You don't have to have the answer right now. It's just a point I wanted to make.
I would even say this too. If you made this fans on 3 concept like the governing concept for how you grow your team and staff, that it would automatically bring all the other results you're looking for in terms of patient satisfaction and health outcomes and employee satisfaction and engagement. It's just going to be the natural byproduct of it. And where you have poor outcomes or you have low employee satisfaction, I'm going to guess it's a fan on 1 environment.
one of your knowledge pieces of this could be to look at other areas you might not have already considered to do, as the pool of recruitment, the fishing where there's fish, digging where there's taters, whatever you want to call it. It's worth spending some time. I just laugh every time I say that word. It's definitely Adam's phrase. It's worth spending some time, maybe adding some really well-stocked pools to the mix. Do you feel like you already, outside of the bonus program, do you have ideas around that? Do you have some things in place that either could be expanded, or is that a brainstorm POM kind of thing?
As far as the pools we pull from?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can definitely, for us to think that we have it all figured out would be a mistake, I think. I mean, obviously we can do better if we're not hitting the mark all the time. So
Right.
one solution we've tried, like for tackling a couple of really difficult positions, is we've hired an outside firm to help us try to find that next level of candidate, the kind that's not necessarily looking for a job, because those tend to be more often than not the candidates that are a great fit.
Right.
How successful has that been? Like, what are those firms' success ratios for bringing you fans on 3?
We don't know yet. We just started, but we've been really impressed with one of the candidates.
Good.
We've seen of 2. One was crazy, and the other was like amazing.
Could you picture like you being on a team and you're like the fan on 3 and you're on a team without fans on 3, fans on 2s and 1s, and someone came to you and said, hey, would you like to be part of a team where you aren't the one carrying everybody's weight and you're surrounded by people that are as committed to excellence and work ethic and positive team environment as you are? Like that right, the fans on 3 usually aren't looking for jobs. But if you could find them, it might be worth investing in that strategy. If there's a search firm that's good at reaching out to people, you want to find those fans on 3 and bring them into your fold. It's worth the extra money to recruit them. They're worth so much more than you pay. I mean, how many fans on 1 does it take to equal a fan on 3?
I mean, a fan on 1 is like negative, like
It's backwards 6, but
Yeah.
you have 6 times the problem.
and then
So
you're
it's
killing,
almost
you're
like a
burning out
negative.
your fans on 3 in the meantime. It's like negative.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I see it. I see fans on 1 as punishment to fans on 3. Like that's why, and that's what I tell my students. I say, look, it's not personal. If you're a fan on 1, it's nothing about you as a person. It's just you're costing my fans on 3, and I can't afford that. They're the most important asset. I can't punish them. You have a choice. You can elevate your fan, or we have to take YPI is the name of our program. You have to take it off your plate. That's how we say. We don't say you're fired or we're kicking you out. We say we're just taking it off your plate.
So we could.
Yeah, go on. I was going to say, do we want to move on to selection?
Yes, because I was going to say we could spend all hour and we.
On any one of these, yeah.
But let's move. I want to do. Let's get through at least touching on some of these others. So selecting. Let's rate on the performance ladder. Let's use that as our scale. Some design integrity there. Where would you say you as a group, and you can also shout out if I want to do individual, but you as a group rate on the performance ladder, and where would you like to be?
On the selection.
I feel like we're at basic
I say
also,
basic.
and wanting to obviously be, advanced to strength as quickly, I'm mastering of it, of course, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Because I think that's I think they kind of go hand in hand, with the recruiting and then the selecting. If we're basic on the recruiting, I think we're basic on the selecting as well, because we have seen, and I think our problem now is we're starting to question ourselves even more so, and I think we're in a rut with that actually, and because I think all of us are second guessing ourselves when so
I feel like we've gotten better though. I mean, at times at selecting. Like, I don't feel terrible at selecting. It's just when you have a bad one, that's all you remember. Like it's like that's all.
Yeah, obviously we're not horrible at it.
But so if you have a bad one, you just think, oh, all right, I'm terrible at this. But you have to look at all the good ones that we have selected too. I mean, so I feel like we're competent at selecting. I feel like I'm competent at selecting. I mean, I don't, every now and then you're going to get somebody who is not who you thought they were, but.
Well, I think the awareness has been elevated too.
Sure.
So that's improved where we were at.
Yeah, like I just won't select anyone. Like the HIM manager position.
I love it. Well, one thing I think, having this more deliberate attention, like you said, you're bringing some focus to it out of necessity. And my guess is too, you're growing as an organization, so you might be hitting a growth spurt of a next level where a lot of things get reassessed. What was working when you were smaller might need to be reassessed in this kind of context, because you're growing big enough to where now some things are showing up that you'd like to address so that you can maintain and strengthen your culture. That's why we're here. So that, I would suggest, is maybe something to think about as well, that maybe you're competent and you just need a little bit more knowledge and skill to bump a couple rungs up. So think about, I'm guessing in the selecting area, it's really applying the talents you have as the group and really sort of getting specific about the kinds of knowledge and skill you might need. I'm going to say that for every one of them, but I think particularly here, because the recruiting, it depends very much on the pool you're selecting from. That can be something you put in place and cultivate. Here, this is, they're in the room with you. You're putting them in the positions, and you're kind of guessing, right? Educated guesses, but it's a guess when you're hiring. So, there's some knowledge and skill probably to be developed here. I don't want us to hurry too much. So if you have any questions before we move on, I would like to open that up, but I don't want to cut us too short.
So how do you weed through those who interview very well, but come back as a totally different person, almost as if they had split personalities?
Yeah, that is the toughest question. I mean, do you have a probation period in place?
Yeah.
You do? And do you exercise it?
We do not have one in place.
You do not? Okay.
Yeah, through our management company, that's not something that they, but we're in the state of Texas too. So with that said, I mean, we can, it is an at-will state, so we can release an individual at any point in time with or without cause. We'd like to have cause so we don't run into all the other, unemployment claims or any sort of legal issues down the road. So. Right, and that's where it gets very tricky and depends very much on the law and the rules. And that's where you accept, reject, adapt. And so I think you'll be able to navigate that well. But if there is maybe it doesn't look like a traditional probation period, but there might be something inside, either doing more than just the initial interview or coming up with a bit of a stopgap. Because my guess is, Nick, you said it earlier, I think you said relentlessly polite. I believe inside the culture, you might give the benefit of the doubt or ascribe maybe better motives than what might be showing up to an early candidate. I don't know if I'm right, but it's something to consider.
And so if there is a way to call it earlier, when you do notice some of those things not aligning with hopefully the document you're going to create about Fans on 3, you'll have an easier time of either addressing those issues and hopefully ensuring a better fit, or having maybe a potential cause. It's tricky. This one's tricky. You know, this is like kind of one of those things that if someone can crack the code, it's going to help everybody. But there are ways. There are. And I do also think it's about you as a group really becoming, you know, a little bit more deliberate. Like you already are doing that. That's why you're in this room talking about this. But creating some strategies and maybe brainstorming around what could work for your organization.
I do think that that's the problem in the past, is that when a behavior shows up, we excuse it, you know, oh, they had a bad day, or, you know, they're not feeling well, or that type of thing. And then when you look back a year later, it was just, it started early on and you just kept making excuses for it. So that's where I think it would help having that framework there, like what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And as soon as something pops up, sit down and have that conversation. Because we have the 30, 60, 90 day thing. And I don't know why within 90 days, we should be able to see whether it's going to work out or not work out, and then just let them go. Say, you know, we've had a couple conversations already. I just don't think you're a good fit. You don't fit with our culture.
I think that is one thing that I feel like we're kind of working towards, or we have a more heightened awareness of now, is catching it early because of the problems that we have encountered, that it's like you kind of always knew something was an issue, but you just, yeah, I know. And so I know now, I mean, and these poor new employees, the first sign.
Well, but I also think early intervention means less intensive intervention. So yes, those things that sort of bubble up, but they're not huge problems, but they might be worth addressing. They might have been let go in the past in terms of, oh, well, this excuse or that excuse. Having an intervention at that stage is often easier for everybody. And it also it gets them familiar with what's acceptable in the culture earlier, which can shape their behavior. That is a skill, and that's not necessarily an easy one, especially among people with personal high standards and a lot of empathy, and kind of like you all are a great team and a great place to work. So your instinct isn't to be searching out that kind of thing early. That is a skill, and it takes practice. Adam, do you want to add anything to that? Because I think you might.
Yeah, I think, you know, a lot of it has to do with where do they come from and how do they behave beforehand? So how can you as accurately as possible gauge their history? Because that's pretty much what is going to tell you how they're going to perform going forward. Not foolproof, maybe, you know, it doesn't allow that people might change or evolve, but that past performance. So if you know what you're looking for, you can gear your interview toward that, and you can gear your calls to references. If you know, I don't know to the degree you do it, and I know it's always difficult because people are afraid to be honest about employees they've had. But if you can kind of gauge performance, gauge their past performance, I think that's really going to tell you a lot right there.
I think you've already made a critical switch that you talked about earlier, about listening instead of selling. You know it's a great place to work. Let them tell you, because the more somebody talks, the more they reveal, especially in a high pressure situation like an interview. And the more concrete examples they can give, the more I think you'll be able to discern. So I think that shift right there is a very key shift. So hold on to that one and cultivate that, because I do think that will help. Because you were able, I'm guessing that second candidate, like you said, it might have come out anyway, but it really had a chance to come out and to the point where it was so clear that you're like, oh no, good to know.
I mean, you look at this. Like, think about people you know who are fans on 3. People with fans on 3 might have been a single parent who got their education while working full time. You know what I mean? Like, that's a fan on 3. Or a fan on 3 is somebody who, when they started at their previous employer at an entry level, by the time they are ready to leave, they were a manager. They progressed within the company. You know, I mean, you can look for evidence of a fan on 3, you know, through things like that. Like, how do fans on 3 behave in life? And then look for those signs in their life. And, you know, maybe they weren't a single parent going through college. Maybe they just went through college. What else did they do in college? Did they just get a degree? Did they get a degree and were they student body president? Or, you know, did they volunteer at the shelter X amount of time? You know, that kind of stuff. What kind of volunteer were they at the shelter?
What I'm describing right here is you can see signs of discretionary effort. That's what you want in your organization. That's what you're trying to get them to tell you examples of on their own steam. And if you're not hearing that, if you're hearing that person is, oh, I did my job, and you know, you'll hear it. And so that's exactly what you're listening for. What are some examples of discretionary effort that person put in other environments?
I think that is probably a great place for us to spend our energy as you think about, I mean, it's so funny because it's sometimes the simple things that you're like, oh yeah, we do that really are the best ideas. And what you just described, I'm thinking back to that HIM candidate that almost hired, and I was like, well, have you done your certification? And she's like, no, I just need to take the test. But how long have you been waiting to take the test? 3 years. Okay. But you know, and at the time I was kind of like, well, I mean, she'd be all right. But it's so good that you would kind of accidentally give them that power to your staff to help you decide, because we might be stuck with somebody that didn't even have the initiative to go take a test that would make them better than everybody else.
Right, because like I actually told them what I was looking for. So then whenever we had them meet her, they said, no, you told us you were looking for X, Y, and Z, and she doesn't have those things. So why are you considering her? Like, y'all are smarter than I am.
That's where the group interview is your friend. And also those clear, defined sort of situations, right, in the school, but also in that discretionary effort, also the fans on 3 alignment. And there's a psychologist named Robert Marr who says, don't dismiss the simple, elegant solution. And often the simple solutions are the best often. So if it's simple, sometimes we do dismiss it because it seems so obvious and it seems like, well, sure, yeah, of course. And I'll just sort of pair that with, because everyone in this room has personally very high standards, we will often ascribe those standards to someone else unconsciously. So where you were probably hearing, okay, she didn't take her test, there's probably a good reason for it, because if you hadn't taken a test, there would have been a good reason for it. If anyone else in this room, there would have been other things they would be working on. So of course you can fill in those blanks of the 3 years easily, you know, and maybe that was probably very unconscious. Or, you know, Heather, you saying like, well, yeah, I'm considering her because, you know, she's good enough, you know, and maybe even ascribing some qualities at a higher level than maybe she wasn't even exhibiting, but then everyone else was like, no, but you said. So that kind of thing, that's going to be your friend right there.
I think the panel interviews, though, has made a huge difference, and to make sure that multiple people are interviewing that same candidate at different times, because bringing them back, like having the conversation, we interview, have the conversation, what we thought, our thoughts, the answers, kind of talk about it, and then the next set of people go, bring them back, have an interview. Those thoughts that you might have after the interview that you might question, or that I didn't question, but then Heather thinks of, well, that doesn't make sense. What's this? And, oh, I didn't think about it that way. Having that is given, I think, us the ability to learn more about the candidates and help us in that selection process.
I want to share something we do for selection, and this is what I mean by group interview. Of course, the panel interview thing is potent, but what we do is for our youth program. Again, I don't know how this would work for you all, but when the students come to interview, they're surprised to find out that they're in a group of like 10 candidates, and then they come in, and then we have them do some exercises, some team initiatives, and we observe them and how they behave. So an extrovert that uses their extroversion for self-promotion is different than the extrovert who uses their extroversion to mobilize a group. An introvert that's just shy and just doesn't want to talk is different than the introvert that is actually focused on tasks and keeping notes and, you know, keeping the group on track. So when we do group interviews, it's not we don't do any of the sitting across from the table, ask them questions. They return the serve. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, that's what interviews are. How good are you at returning a serve? And so here they're actually forgetting they're in an interview environment and they're actually engaged in this activity, and we're observing them. Like I said, I don't know how that might work, but if you're looking for like 5 nurses and you can bring in 25 nurses to participate in a group interview process, it's way more fun, I'll tell you that.
Fun for you guys, probably not fun for them, but you'll learn a lot.
No, they actually have fun too, and that's the thing. Like, they leave the interview feeling like, wow, that didn't feel like an interview at all, and I had a lot of fun, and I felt like I made friends even, you know. It's kind of interesting. Anyway.
Yeah. Do we make sure that our panels are fans on 3? Because a fan on 1 sitting and watching somebody,
they'll be like, wow, that person's like great, they're better than I am. And it'd be like, yeah, but everybody is.
Exactly.
That's a great point. What a great point that you brought up, making sure you make sure the people selecting have earned that privilege to select in a way.
Well, and I think we probably put like the best that we have, but it doesn't mean that they're a fan on 3. Like, in certain situations, you know, like it may be, well, this is the best that we have, but they're just fans on 2s, maybe not fans on 3s. And so maybe in that situation, we don't even, if the best we have is a fan on 2, do we really want them to interview?
Well, I used to get Angie to interview because she was a fan on 3, and she's
like 5 fans on 3.
I mean, I've sat in on panel interviews where the person, you know, leading it was just, you're like, that did not come out of their mouth, did it?
So I see what you're saying, though, like maybe get somebody from a different area that is a fan. Like, if you don't have enough fans on 3 in that particular area, then reach out to a fan on 3 from another area.
Kind of like our auditors, we pull auditors from different departments because they'll see things that the group sees every day, doesn't think to consider.
So, you guys, I'm not surprised about the depth of discussion. I'm really just pleased by it. I didn't know there was going to be this much discussion on these things, which is fantastic. It means it really does hit a spot. We do want to cover the last 2 real quick. And so the next one is orienting. And by the way, if you handle your recruiting, your selecting, and your orienting well, you'll have to spend way less time on developing. Because most organizations, this is the only phase at which they have any hopes of getting things on track. And then they're not even that good at this. But you could preempt all that by being good at this, this, and this. So it's about orienting people. And you know, we have our 5 gorillas story. But it's really about, you know, setting clear who we are, what do we stand for, and then welcoming them in, making them feel part of it. If they're on board with what you're about, then officially like welcoming them into the fold. You know, it should be like, you know, like almost like I don't want to say a ritual like for an organization, but there's reason why those things are very powerful in fraternities or sororities or some of the secret societies that I'm a part of. I'm just kidding. A person who's part of a secret society does not say they're part of a secret society. I've seen Eyes Wide Shut. I know the password is Fidelio. But, you know, really it is about, hey, welcome to this, you know. This is earning your status into this organization is a meaningful thing, and people will value it more.
This one, I feel like, again, another simple, direct solution that is underrated. So bonding, I think actually think about like what would the ritual look like if you don't have one, and is there a way to strengthen that step? And can there be a step that's consistent among every employee that walks in the door the first day, or in the training process, or wherever you count that beginning? Maybe it's after you just think about it. Think about it might work, because that is very underutilized.
An initiation to your branches. Well, with my last orientation, I made them get up and dance
Yes. Orientations are a great way to embarrass people. They have to. They have to do what you tell them. Exactly. It's called hazing. All right. And then developing. And of course, we've talked a lot about it and a lot when we talk about our intervention. I don't know how you guys felt about it. This is more like a vanity question, but I really love looking at the word origins. And I love that the word origin for developer is to unfold or unfurl, like really letting a person unfold and unfurl and come into their own and, you know, really be at their best. So there's just so much involved with developing, but all of it's going to be so much more fun when you do the first 3 steps right. Because a lot of things that we call developing are really disciplining. Getting someone to not be a jerk, getting someone to be decent, you know, be reasonable, be cooperative, be accountable, be helpful. Pretty much that's it. You're not going to, if somebody's not those things, you're not going to, it's going to take a lot to make them become those things. But if they already are those things, then developing them is really the process of unfurling them, unfolding them. And then what we is normally called retention, Felinda and I are playing around with the idea of calling it advancing. And you're not just retaining somebody. You know, I got you. You're stuck. Golden handcuffs. You're here for life. It's more about advancing them to say, how can we help you even be more successful? You've already shown that you're one of us. How do we promote you? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? How can we advance you, your life? That kind of thing.
One thing I'd suggest is, you know, we didn't rate the last 2 sections, but I want you to think about that. And I would like you to take another dive in with the strength thinking worksheet. You can continue with what you have already if you already started on it. Don't have to do more work. But maybe pick one of these areas and think through the practical steps of the strength thinking model, applying it to you and where you'd like to be. What activity, what are some of the knowledge and skills you need to get there? So that will be something I'd like you to take a stab at that for next time. You'll have the video on groups and teams, hopefully within a day or two. We'll send an email. And then I do want to just say open for questions here, but I wanted to make sure you have that, familiar with what the homework will be, and feel comfortable with it. And if anybody has a chance, now I know you're in a Well, let's go back to the adventure metaphor. But Adam's forwarded the document around engagement. If you want to start working on a document that does sort of articulate the alignment around what a fan on 3 looks like for your culture, I think it could be very useful. So if you have time, you want to take a stab at that, that could be a really useful thing, and we could discuss it next time or the time after.
Good session?
Yes, thank you. Lots of good conversation.
Yeah, this is so important. I mean, I know the Strengths Finder and all that stuff is really cool, and we love it, of course. But this is the stuff that really determines the quality of an organization. If you can turn these 4 areas, recruiting, selecting, orienting, and developing, into strengths, you guys can write your own tickets. You will be the stuff of legends. So are we on for next week? Yes, we are. So we'll be putting up a video soon on that. We'll let you know when it's ready. You guys have any questions for us?
I think so. I'm going to look at the calendar because I know Nick's out Tuesday, right?
We are not on for
I didn't think we were.
We're not on for next
Nick's
week.
out Tuesday, and I thought someone else was.
Let me just take a quick.
Yeah, I'm out. I don't show that we have a session. However, the next session I show is, oh my goodness.
I don't show one.
Oh, you know what? Did we just not schedule them out that far?
We might not have. I think we've talked about.
There's not one on the 8th either.
I've gone on past that even.
No,
I put you in for the 1st and 8th just to hold this.
The 8th, which is fine. We have senior leadership on Tuesday the 8th, and CQI meeting that.
The 8th.